Hello and welcome. This is James coming at you live on this very cool Friday afternoon. I've just posted about this on the main channel and I'm just going to be waiting until some of the viewers from the main channel start trickling in, and hopefully we'll get a little bit of an audience going over here. If this is your first time here, welcome. This is where I do live streams. I try to do it every Friday. That sometimes doesn't end up working. This isn't a podcast, by the way. I usually do a podcast on this channel, but I thought today we'll just sort of keep it loosey-goosey. We do try to keep it loosey-goosey here regularly, but I thought maybe we'll just do a little bit of a post-mortem. I've never done a post-mortem before. I've been thinking about doing it for a long time. I just can never get my act together. I'm a very unorganized person, and I always like the idea of, like, there's some other channels who'll do a post-mortem live stream just to talk about the video, talk about questions, try to find some questions and answers. This one was I was expecting this one to be divisive. I was expecting it to be very divisive, actually. You know, when you talk about topics like nationalism, but it's actually been doing quite well, and especially the like ratio has been a lot better than I expected. Sometimes you can get sort of like a 5% or somewhere around there like ratio on a controversial video. Sometimes you, like when I did my video on Croatia, for example, that one had quite a high dislike ratio for the channel as a whole. I'm actually kind of curious. I'll see if I can bring up what the like ratio is. Luckily, we're very this is what makes this a lot less daunting is the fact that we have just 2 live viewers at the moment, because I live in the worst time zone, which means that nobody's ever awake when I'm awake. But Europe should be waking up soon, at the very least. So let's have a look. The video on Croatia had quite a high dislike bar, so it had a 91% like ratio. That was a video where sort of the thesis about the video was just talking about Balkanization, trying to explore the differences in the Balkans and why that led to this crash out, horrible war, the Yugoslav wars. Made this video a long time ago. Video on Croatia. YouTube's back end is oftentimes quite annoying in they give you so much information sort of at a glance, and then when you want to find out something very specific, it can sometimes be a little bit less than helpful. Hello, Sotiris Mizolis. Welcome. If this is your first time here, please give the video a like, the live stream a like. That would be helpful. Good morning to you. Where are you joining us from today? Yeah, so YouTube's backend. Yeah, can't seem to find the exact numbers here, but anyway, so that is a 91% dislike ratio. So that one I would basically say is about as bad as it gets. Like, it doesn't get worse than that, but generally they're sort of hovering in the 90 to 100% like ratio, somewhere in there. And the Serbia video is currently sitting on a 95.2% like ratio. So that is incredibly good. That's incredibly well received, and I'm really pleased with that. The video didn't turn out like exactly the way I wanted it to. There was a lot of stuff I had to cut out. There was a lot of specific areas where I wanted to expound upon something, so I thought okay, well, instead of making this video, 3 hours long, I'll sort of cut it up into pieces, and we'll see where we can go from there. The writing process especially was incredibly difficult. I basically had the idea from the beginning to make the video very intentionally not a linear history in the same way that I've maybe done in the past. It was very deliberate that I didn't title this video The Animated History of Serbia. I'm sort of trying to experiment and move away from that kind of linear historical content. This is a very much an analytical video. It's working within a theory. It's working within a set boundary of a thesis, if you will. And the thesis is talking about Balkan nationalism broadly, but focusing in on Serbian nationalism in particular, its origins, where it comes from. People get very touchy about that word, and I was a little bit experimental to see what could I do by including that word in the title and in the script and the thesis statement of the video. It can come across as quite provocative, and generally speaking, I think that's done pretty well. I'm pretty pleased with how it's been received. Most people have been really enjoying it, so I'm really glad about that. And yes, there will be absolutely more in the future. I'm not sure how many videos are going to be in the series. I can say that I'm going to try and make part 2 quite a bit shorter, because it just takes too long to make at this stage. And there's also going to be some side videos. I'm thinking about doing a shorter side video on Illyria, for example. It was a big chunk of this video that I had to cut out right at the beginning, just going into way too much detail about the prehistoric part of the world called Illyria that Yugoslavia eventually came to be synonymous with in terms of like its land area, and now obviously there's a lot of connections with Illyria and Illyrianism in the Balkans today. So I thought, let's give that a go. We'll do some side projects and try not to put out a video once a year. That would be really good. Sotiris, it's my 3rd time watching a live stream of yours, but it's so damn early. I usually have to leave for work after half an hour or so. I do apologize for that. I live in, like I said before, the worst possible time zone there is. I live in Australia. We are awake before everybody else, and we're going to sleep just as everybody else is waking up. So I apologize for that. I wish I had the time or the energy to be able to do these live streams at a more reasonable time zone, but at the very least, I can capture the Australians, my fellow Australians, and also I can capture the eastern seaboard of Asia and that kind of area. So yeah, this video was a lot of fun to make. I got to work with some fantastic artists, one of which will be on screen right now. This one was done by Ravignon. The links are always going to be in the description to check out their work, and if you want to, say hello or show appreciation or whatever. Yeah, and I really like the way the video turned out. It had a far more artistic feel to it. Art says a lot. I think art is a very important part of learning about history and learning about politics and culture and that kind of thing. And having the art always wants to say something, doesn't it? It's always trying to make a statement. That idea of a picture speaks 1,000 words. And these frescoes that are painted in and amongst in particular of Serbian monasteries, in Serbian Orthodox monasteries, these are imitations of their family trees that have these ideas of like sacred roots. So all these little golden leaves and that kind of thing. These are sort of meant to be tree branches branching out and that kind of thing. Very interesting from an artistic history standpoint, like an art history vibe. It's always depicting this like grandeur and holiness of the sacred dynasty and the sacred root. And you'll see that on top of each of the characters' heads, you'll see a halo. And what that means is that they've been sanctified. And sanctified means become a saint. So sainthood is posthumous. Obviously, I'm not an expert on religious history or anything like that, but sainthood is very much at the core of the sacred dynasty. It is why it exists, sort of, in a very simplistic way of understanding that. Having a member of your a progenitor of your royal family be sanctified or become a saint is very important in creating this idea, this concept of the sacred dynasty. So every person who has a connection to that dynasty is in a lot of ways touched by that sacredness. They become sacred by descent or by association or marriage or that kind of thing. So for a long time in Serbia, the idea was that you had to sort of have this connection to the sacred dynasty in order to be successful politically. That gave you a lot of weight. It carried a lot of weight, and it carried a lot of prestige to be linked to the sacred dynasty. And there were subsequent dynasties, obviously. Subsequent dynasties, including like the Brankovic family. So when the empire collapsed and fragmented into all these little pieces, you basically had all these little princedoms and principalities separating from themselves and becoming this like fragmented former empire. And a lot of these noble families had connections to the original sacred dynasty. So one of those was the House of Brankovic. And there were a couple of others. I think the last Serbian king was just sort of it was somebody from Bosnia. And it was long after when the despotate is essentially being taken over by the Ottomans, and then he sort of titles himself the King of Serbia. And there was a couple of he was basically a pretender to the throne. Can't remember his name right now, but who cares? Unimportant right now. Yeah, but let's get a little bit into it. Maybe I thought maybe we could look at some maps. That's always fun. Always fun to look at a map. And that can sort of help anchor us. Yeah, I should have had this bit on Elira up before, shouldn't I? That would have been helpful. But that would have required me to be a little bit more organized. And I'm allergic to being organized. I don't know if you know that. Like, it could actually kill me. I'm anaphylactic to organization. And I'm also very tired. I feel like I've been working on this video so damn long. And yeah, I guess I was kind of talking about how the idea of the video came about. So I was kind of thinking about exploring nationalism, that kind of thing. And then as I was doing it, I just kept reading more and more material. I couldn't help myself from just picking up another book and reading another book. And it sort of changed the thesis of the video constantly. And the idea was that the original idea was going to be sort of separating Serbia's history into different kinds of nationalism. So there would be like religious nationalism, ethnic nationalism, linguistic nationalism, that kind of thing. Just different kinds of things that would all sort of be, nationalism by any other name. It's still just nationalism. That was the thesis statement I was working with. And very quickly, it sort of started to become this idea that, like, the pillars on which Serbian nationalism rest are way more complicated than I gave them credit for. And the odd thing about it is at every turn, there would be something that just sort of threw off my statement and my thesis statement, and I'd have to rewrite it again. So one of the things was religious nationalism. So the idea of the sacred dynasty, this intertwining of church and state, and then the state collapses, so the church is the only thing left, and it has to intertwine itself with the nation instead of the state. So the nation is people, and obviously that's not a concept that was fully fleshed out by the time this was arising, but this is all sort of retrospective analysis. So the nation is the people, then the state is the state. The state is the country, the law, the institutions, the monarchy, all that kind of stuff. So they'd gone a long way in copying the Byzantine idea of like marrying church and state. So the church was very much involved in the Byzantine Empire. The emperor was, you know, appointing church bishops and the patriarch and that kind of thing. So they went one step further in Serbia in an effort to break away from the control of Constantinople, because that's the ecumenical patriarch is in Constantinople. They decided to marry these two things together even more, even closer, by making them part of the same single family. And I think there was only like one other member of the Nemanjić dynasty directly that became another metropolitan and patriarch. But overall, the root of it had been part of the same family. And then obviously all these people get sainted, and that sort of by extension like adds to the whole marriage of the church and state. So by the time the Ottomans come in and collapse the Serbian Empire and the Serbian Despotate and all that kind of thing, all these remnants of the Serbian Empire, the state no longer exists, so the church has to marry itself to the nation instead. So that was one of the pillars that Serbian nationalism was going to be on religious nationalism. And I very quickly ran into a problem there, which was, for a long time, you know, there's these commentaries of people who travel through the Balkans during that era, you know, the 1500s, 1600s, 1700s, and people are like, you know, hostile to religion and see it as backwards and don't really care much for going to church. Churches are empty in some places, and they still, there's this idea of you know, these people who travel through the Balkans of describing the Serbs and the Orthodox inhabitants in general as like extremely militant and defensive of the Orthodox Church, but simultaneously, you know, very degrading to the church at the same time. So it was like they'd hate the church and they'd make fun of the bishops who couldn't read or write, and they would refuse to pay their church tithings and that kind of thing, but at the same time they would be like militantly defensive of it. So there's these like internal contradictions that just make no sense when you're working with a very you know an amateur historical communicator like myself is sort of struggling to understand these two things. And then there were other things like martial nationalism, this idea of these like intense martial traditions. And I thought, okay, well, let's investigate that. The another pillar, and I thought it was simplistic. It'll be about you know these arguments about geographic determinism and highland cultures that fight against the oppressive Ottomans who are down in the valleys and in the towns, and they'll become these like haiduks and rob from the rich and give to the poor and that kind of thing. And then the roadblock that you run into there is how they were fighting whomever they chose. They weren't just fighting the Ottomans. They didn't just see themselves as like, oh, we're the Serbs and you're the Ottomans and therefore we're going to fight against you. No, they were fighting against each other. They had these intergenerational blood feuds. They had these clan societies, these like mafioso type people, and religious institutions like the Prince Bishopric of Montenegro. And violence and that kind of thing is just common throughout the Dinaric highlands of the Balkans. And at every turn I got to, the pillar that I was working with was just got more and more complicated and more nuanced and more difficult to understand. And I think that's why the video took so long to come out. And obviously the obvious stuff is like drawing and researching and looking up maps and downloading references and that kind of thing. So it got away from me a little bit, and that's partly my fault for trying to pick a topic that was so difficult. And And it's also, the rest of it is also my fault because it takes me so long to make these things. And I get all perfectiony about it. But anyway, that's enough about that. So here we got some beautiful maps of Illyricum. I didn't get to use all my maps, so I always try to use them here on the stream, on the podcast, that kind of thing. So these is sort of like the Ava Khaganate and migrations and all that kind of thing. So I thought that these would be helpful to have on screen, just so we know what the heck we're talking about and what time period we're talking about. So what I wanted to do today was just engage with a few of the comments I got, a couple of the criticisms. We got, as expected, quite a lot of responses from people who are sympathetic, shall we say, to Serb nationalism and the Serbian literary cycles and mythological cycles. They're very, there's a lot of people quite sympathetic to those ideas that were quite unhappy, but you know, that's by the by. So White October 4582 had this very, you know, had a bit of a distaste for self-hating Marxists, which is always a very funny phrase to me. It's a very shallow history narrative filled with contempt for everything noble and sacred on that land. Mocking the church and civilization builders isn't insight, it's cowardice masquerading as critique. You didn't miss the market. Here, you disfigured it beyond recognition. So I think we can address that White October is not happy with this video. And his profile picture contains an image of what I thought was a little bit ironic. Of Petar II Petrovich Njegoš, otherwise known as Prince Bishop Njegoš. He is famous. He was the Vladika of Montenegro, the Prince Bishop. So he is another one of these traditions. We didn't get to talk about Montenegro much in this episode, but hopefully we'll be able to cover them in future. He wrote a very long poem called The Mountain Wreath. I hope I'm getting this right. I'm allergic to preparing. So he wrote a poem and play called The Mountain Wreath, which is among the most abhorrent and violent poems I have ever read in my life. It is filled with grotesque depictions of intense bloodlust and violence that would make your stomach churn. I would not recommend reading a copy. And as one of the authors that I was reading commented about it, the English translations of this, if you do not speak Serbian or Serbo-Croatian, the English translations of this thing don't even do it justice. It is more bloodlusty than perhaps any other any translation into English could possibly capture. So I just thought that was interesting, coming from White October. I thought that was an interesting, ironic thing for him to be defending the sacred land upon which, and the church being mocked. I thought that was all quite interesting. Anyway, so ZSRW4QQ says he is addressing the part where we talk about the 5 C's of early Christianity. So this is about the time you can see on screen now with, this is the Byzantine Empire and the Kingdom of Italy, which is the Langobard Kingdom, which comes from the Lombards. So the Lombards, they come from This idea is in Latin, and Langobardum means like the people with the long beards. So that's one of the ways that name has survived. So it's the Kingdom of Italy officially. That's the green part that you're seeing there, and that area was once dominated by the Byzantine reconquest of Italy. And around that time, that's when the sort of like the control that Byzantium had over Rome starts to wane. And at the time that the Pentarchy, so the Pentarchy is this idea of the 5 C's, like the idea that Orthodox Christianity, or what became Orthodox Christianity, is sort of contained within these 5 C's. So you got Rome, Constantinople, Antioch, Jerusalem, and Alexandria. So they didn't come about all at the same time. There were sort of early centers of Christianity that sort of got replaced or subsumed, or the importance of other ones would happen at different times. So I think originally Corinth had was a center of Christian activity, and I can't remember the other one. It might have not have. Ephesus, maybe? Might have been Ephesus. So these letters that tradition holds that Paul wrote his letters to, there was these early Christian congregations there. So they eventually get subsumed into the authority of Constantinople, which becomes this other see, and it's very, very important because its bishop, its archbishop, or at the time I think it was just bishop, is right next door to the emperor. So the emperor's right there, and therefore the emperor starts to have a lot of say over what happens in that particular diocese of the empire. So that becomes really important. Being in the capital really helps you. And in ZS's comment, he said, weren't the other 3 patriarchs also under Eastern Roman rule in 527? So I'm just going to bring that up on the map. So before Justinian, we have here, and we're talking about this area down here. So Antioch sort of sits down here. My mouse, of course, it's not happening here. So it's in the Oriens province, and Egyptus. Down at the bottom is Antioch, Alexandria, and what was the last one? Antioch, Constantinople, Rome, Alexandria. So yes, they did control them at the time. To answer your question, the reason why I didn't go on about those ones is because they weren't. And Jerusalem, of course. So the reason I didn't go on about those was because they were not relevant to the rest of the topic of the video. They eventually get taken over by the Umayyad Caliphate, the conquests and the followers of Muhammad. So they eventually become very reduced in authority within the Christian world because they are seen as being overtaken or under captivity by Muslim rulers. Next question is at 707. It's curious how Rashka on this map doesn't include the city of Rash, which it was named after. Yeah, so for a long time, Serbia was known as Rashka, so we'll see if we can get there. So this is sort of roughly, I don't know what year this is supposed to be. I think I've written down here, this is 814, but yeah, close enough. So Rash, the city of Ras or Rash, was a little bit over on this border, so it would have been in the mountains, sort of like north of Duklia. And the reason being is because the town, the fortress city of Rash, which is actually more of a complex. I thought it was quite interesting. I was reading like a really good explainer about the archaeological site that currently exists. It's sort of like 3 separate sites. So one of them is the main mountain fortress that exists sort of on the top of a hill there. I don't know the name of the hill, but it's a sort of complex above a hill. See if we can find it on here. So I think it's like Stari Rash. There we go. Yeah, so the complex that sort of exists to this day. So this is this main fortress that on top of the hill, and there's a cave below it. So this cave has also been excavated, I believe. And then there is what they believe. I think this bit here is supposed to be like a market town, and the center of administration. So there's a market, and then there's also a former chapel there, I believe, and that kind of thing. And then further up, here somewhere, is also another old chapel. Can't seem to find it right now. Somewhere in and around Novi Pazar. But yeah, it's a sort of complex that was. Oh, here we go. There's another piece of it. So I'm sure the Serbs in here can, and on the other side of the hill, so they're used for defense. This area was flip-flop back and forward. It was a very strategic location. So we've got these like Dinaric Highlands here. Way up here in the mountains. So the control of these trade routes and valleys and that kind of thing was very important. And the reason why Rash is not in there at that particular time, at the point that you're talking about, is because it is flip-flopped back and forward between the Tsars of Bulgaria and the Serbian princes, the Serbian knezes. So yes, even though the area was called Rashkar, and that's like a sort of like a post hoc name for that area, it is a very it's just like the name is just carried forward. It didn't always control the city after which it's named, but it did control like a lot of. I think Rash is also named after the name also comes from a river and the valley and that kind of thing. So I think it's one of those things where, you know, maybe they didn't control it at every single point in history, but they sort of flip-flop back and forward a few times. So I thought that was interesting to note. Whiskey's K or Whiskey SK commented, very nicely done. One typo, it's Magyars, not Magars. What a mistake to make. A little spelling mistake. Apparently I spelled that wrong. So just correcting that. Micah History says, so good to see you back. Hopefully we don't have to wait another 9 months. I think so too, hopefully. Jonathan Curran 5366 says, you should have uploaded this on St. Vitus Day next month. So that's the Vidovdan, the St. Vitus Day, the Christian martyr. Boy, I wish I could have done that. I needed to get the video out really badly. It was just, I wish I'd thought of that, actually. That would have been good. And I wish that I could get part 2 out on that time, but I don't think that that's going to happen. Yeah, that I will regret that until the channel dies, that I did not upload this on St. Peter's Day. Although maybe it's for the best. Maybe I didn't want to like piss off the Serbs a little bit extra on their special day. Vukashin 1539 says, what is the name of the song? So I got a lot of these comments. What is the name of the song at XYZ? I am sorry, I totally forgot to put all that in the description, but I will be updating that. Thank you for letting me know. Kaiser1855 says, bro is finally off of his podcast. Yeah, people have been commenting a lot, like, get back to the regular videos on the podcast. So just thought that was funny. So next one, Kurtonella. Normally, I do like these videos and your content in general, and this was a good historic recap. The thing that I really don't like is the idea that nationalism is bad. It's like, let's see what made Serbs so nationalistic, which is a problem. We like our nationalism. Sorry, not sorry. All I have to say to that is that if you think that I'm the only one who says that nationalism is bad, you might need to get out a bit more. That's pretty much all I can say. If that's the conclusion you came to, is that, you know, nationalism being bad is a fringe opinion, that I find that quite interesting. Kname 1882 says, I think Yugoslavia as a concept emerged in like the 1840s or something like that with Ilya Garashinin, and included Bulgaria also. So generally not in the 18th century. So that's getting very caught up in the labels that we give to things. When you talk about these concepts, they're really piecing together little bits of ideas that happen over literally centuries. So the idea of Yugoslavism as like a either on one end of the scale, it's like a very idea of like a nation of nations, so a country of agreeing that people are like different and distinct and like fusing them together in a sort of civic nationalism, that kind of thing. And then on the other end of the scale, Yugoslavism is about like, no, we're all the same. Like, you know, let's focus on our similarities and on our differences. We're all the same, but we've been corrupted by politics and history and that kind of thing to be divided into these different nationalities. So there's two different scales upon which Yugoslavism rests, and one of those is very much informed by the Illyrian movement, which is a very much older than that. And even can go back as far as something called, I'm wondering if I can get this right. So, I wonder if I got this. Something called the Illyrian Armorials. So it's a collection of medieval coats of arms. It is entirely fictional, but people at the time thought it was real. And it was composed sometime between, this is Wikipedia, so take it with a grain of salt, 1584 and 1594. So it goes back to the 16th century by some definitions of the idea. So the idea was that a Ragusan author would put together this collection of Illyrian armorials, collecting together medieval coats of arms of the South Slavs, who at the time were just sort of identified as Illyrians. That was sort of the Illyrian idea of taking the name Illyria, which was a name for the region that had been passed down for many generations at that point for the area, and then sort of constructing a nation around that and then fictionalizing it. It is almost completely fictional. There's a couple of coats of arms in there that are real, but generally the rest are universally agreed among sort of historians and iconographers and that kind of thing to be, complete fiction. And the point he was trying to make was that Illyria and Illyrianism was a sort of united historical state with defined boundaries in the Middle Ages. And the reason he did it was because he was trying to get a job. He was trying to get a job in the Spanish Navy, the Royal Spanish Navy, and he had to prove that he was the descendant of nobility. That was one of the requirements. So he invented this fictional armorial, which I think is really funny. And some historians trace the invention of this armorial as the origin of Illyrianism and broadly, pan-national, pan-South Slavic national identity, which is, one of the pillars upon which Yugoslavism rests. Apologies, my tongue is getting very twisted today. RP-FV1JS. Man, these are terrible names to say on a live stream, huh? A bit of constructive criticism. Tell us the dates as you go along. For me, at least, it helps understand the context. And I commented on your comment that I do have the dates on the top left corner, but then you clarified what you meant was that if I say the dates more often, I will definitely take that on board, because you said that you listen to the videos, and I'm definitely somebody who does that too. I listen to videos sort of through my headphones without watching, and it can be really helpful to have the dates said out loud rather than just on screen. Yes, that is good constructive criticism. I'm definitely going to try and take that on board. I think that would be helpful for the future. Rogue SRB, so Rogue Serb, I would think. Uskok does not mean escapees. Uskok is from the Serbian word skok, means jump, and the literal translation is jump in. Somebody who jumps into hostile territory, and then when they return to safe territories with the loot. In other words, guerrilla tactics. Hajduk had similar tactics, except they would be in occupied territories all the time. So, yes and no, basically. So, I'm not the one who use the word escapees as a translation that was in one of the source materials that I was using. But yeah, I think it's escapees, and the idea that it's I think what's happened there is there's like a trap, there's like an etymological trap that's happening there. You know, you're sort of using the definition of a word to describe something in its literal direct translation. So say uskok means like somebody who jumps in, and that's the idea. But when those people were eventually fled away from the Ottoman Empire into the Serbian court in a lot of the time would use the term Illyrian when describing the people, and sometimes it would use the term uskok to describe the people, because that's how the people often describe themselves. So in the minds of those keeping records in the Habsburg court, for example, they refer to people as uskok, which they thought meant escapees, people who escaped, and then that becomes another definition from the word. So it's just the way language changes over time. It's not a strictly etymological thing where the word is just literally what it says on the tin, that kind of thing. But yes, I thought that was interesting to address, that the word uskok literally translates to somebody who, sort of pounces or jumps in and then jumps out again. And hajduk, similar kind of thing, like a bandit or a robber. Gazar da Limpie, sorry if I'm butchering your name, 4038 says, Saint Sava was a prince, Rashko Nemanjic, who did in fact become a monk and eventually Serbia's first archbishop. His father, Stefan Nemanja, did in fact become a monk, as would a few of his descendants for the next 200 years. This is all documented by foreign historians, not just Serbian Orthodox ones. And there's even a correspondence between Saint Sava the Patriarch and other bishops at the time discussing if the Serbian church should receive autocephaly. No one denies that Serbia first received kingdom status from the Pope. This was a strategic move by Stefan I to break away from Byzantine influence. However, he was crowned a second time in 1219 by his brother Sava in an Orthodox rite when Sava became archbishop. This is a failure on my part to in the script writing. When I described the story of the origin of the sacred dynasty, I said afterward, is this story true? The part that I was referring to was the crowning, specifically the crowning story, not the story about them becoming monks. I don't think anybody disagrees that they became monks. What people do disagree on is how exactly which source of power they went to. So we live in a time of historical hindsight. We can look back on and see what was the more likely version of events to happen. But at the time when Serbian nationalism was being constructed in the centuries, sort of from the 14th, 15th to 18th, 19th centuries, an enormous stretch of time, when Serbian nationalism is being constructed and synthesized over those centuries, they're really flip-flopping on these two narratives. So the one narrative is that Saint Sava crowned his brother, and that's about it. And then there's another narrative that Saint Sava was just sort of a sideline to this whole process, and that his brother Stefan Nemanjic, his older brother Stefan Nemanjic, got his crown from the Pope. And if you go and you look at the papal records, the Vatican's records, they claim, yes, no, we sent a papal legate and that kind of thing. So it's one of these things where there's definitely two distinct narratives, and possibly more. The two distinct narratives are the one that survive. And when Serbian nationalism is being sort of synthesized and constructed, then the narrative in which Stefan is crowned by his brother, who's eventually Saint Sava and is originally named Rasko. He I forgot where I'm going with this. So the narrative where he is crowned by his own brother is the one that becomes incredibly popular to the Serbian national myth. And the trap that you don't want to really fall into is saying, well, I've learned this thing, and if you're a Serb, or for example, if you learned Serbian history or whatever, and you learned in school that the idea that he was crowned by the Pope is natural and unaccepted. It's easy to fall into that trap of saying this historical hindsight that we're looking back on and we're analyzing what actually happened, and therefore it's not controversial. That was sort of not really the point of that part of the script. It was more to say that one version of that story, the version in which Saint Sava crowned his own brother, and therefore the authority and stuff didn't extend outside of that little family. They didn't have to kowtow to the Pope, and they didn't have to kowtow to the Patriarch in Constantinople. They wanted to be completely independent. That version of the story was extremely powerful and influential, and people took it for granted as fact. And it was only after, much, much later in time, when historical analysis becomes a thing, that people start to realize, okay, there's less likely things going on here. The general consensus now is that probably both happened. He probably did receive a crown from the Pope, and he probably did also get a crown from his own brother a little bit later in 1219, I believe. So I think that is one of these things where it's an attempt to sort of synthesize contradictory stories and come out with a much neater story that has had a bow tied onto it. And then that whole neat story gets sort of ripped apart by later historical analysis, and they say, no, actually, this is probably more likely to be a legend, and he was actually crowned by the Pope first, and therefore, it puts a hole in the theory that they weren't kowtowing to the Pope, and when in fact, which is silly in and of itself, because it doesn't really matter. It matters to you if you're the kind of person who just thinks that they're truly actually insubordinate to Rome. They're truly in subordination to the Roman Catholic Church, and that's not something that I myself care about, for one, but I don't think it sort of says a lot about like what argument you're trying to make if you really want to like hammer down on the story and who crowned who, that kind of thing. So yeah, I would just suggest not to fall into those traps. And yeah, my script could have definitely been clearer. Saloni 91 says it had quite a long polemic. So I'm not going to read the whole thing, but one of the things he says, you fail to understand that the Kosovo battle was the last true bastion as the potential to stop the Ottoman invasion. I don't know why you would think that. That is a very, very, very oversimplified view of what the Battle of Kosovo was. Yes, it was very important, and it was very influential, and it was talked about all over the continent at the time, because everyone had sort of this collective awareness of the coming Turkish threat, and the monarchies of Europe were very anxious about this. There was a Muslim power that was encroaching on all sides. So you got the foothold that had already been made in Spain for a long time, and now there was a foothold being gained in the Balkans. So yeah, people were very anxious about this and anxious to know about what happened at Kosovo. But there was a second battle of Kosovo. There was a crusade at Varna. There was a battle at Mohacs. So all these other subsequent battles that definitely were viewed by the Christian kingdoms as crusades against the Ottoman Turks and bastions to potentially stop the Ottoman invasion. Of course, even further, you can go back even more ahead in time and talk about the siege of Vienna, the various. The siege of Budapest, that kind of thing. There's lots of very watershed moments that are happening along that time. While the entire Serbian statehood and nobility didn't completely die there, most of the prominent ones did, as well as empire status, even kingdom status. Serbians becoming Ottoman vassals actually boosted the Ottoman army extremely, a fact that many fail to talk about as one of the strongest cavalry forces of that age, later fighting alongside Ottomans, major battles that made Ottoman Empire endure big challenges. Yes, so that is, completely true. A lot of Serbs fought in the Ottoman armies and distinguished themselves. Stefan Lazarevich, so the son of Prince Lazar, he fought alongside them. Prince Marko, or King Marko, who is the son of Vukašin, and I can never say the last name, Hrebeljanović. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. So he fought alongside the Serbs. Another one, I can't remember that, but there was several Serbian vassals who contributed quite a lot of prowess, martial prowess to the Ottoman conquests. They were vassals, of course. They were vassals of the Ottoman army, and that's all absolutely true. So that is all I have for today in terms of the questions and comments. And yeah, if I see some good ones in the future, I'll be sure to address those. Yeah, I don't think the video was perfect by any means, and there's definitely some mistakes in there, and definitely some arguments that I could have made a bit better. But a lot of it was sort of cut down and tried to really make a cohesive narrative that didn't take too long. Satira says, have you thought about covering the modern history of Greece? It won't disappoint in terms of territorial ambitions. There's quite a tone of plot twists. Yes, the answer to that question is that I have thought about it. I have an interest in pretty much everything and doing everything. It just takes forever, So that is all for today. I think we're going to end it there. Thank you all for joining, and we will see you next time.